Hi, thank you. We're gonna make a start on the formal part of the event. There's lots of you here, and I understand there's even more out there watching on Zoom. So it's great that you could all be here at the launch of the Net Zero Roadmap, which has been launched by the APPG on Net Zero. Which I'm Alex Sobel, I'm the chair of the APPG, and thanks to Atkins who are supporting the launch today. A lot of us were at COP26, and the APPG had a range of events there and worked with our colleagues in the other APPGs, working with Alok Sharma, the COP president, and our UK team. It's now post-COP, and it's time for us to do the serious work of how not only do we deliver our NDCs and our own national contributions, but how we can look at going beyond that, because that's where we are in the Net Zero APPG, and how we can deliver net zero as quickly as possible. And this report really looks at, focuses on that gap analysis, looking at where the gaps are between the government stated plans and where we need to be, whether that's the Committee on Climate Change's reports on the carbon budgets, or our own wanting to be speedier and hitting that net zero. And I particularly want to thank University of Oxford and Miles Allen, who can't be here today but is somewhere out there, and Zach Angell, who is here today. And Miles isn't here because of the thing that we're all thinking about, which is COVID. I don't think he's got COVID, but I think he's been whatever we call it now. He's got a test, or he's been pinged or something like that. I'm sure Zach will know. But Zach's going to present the report. And I'm really pleased we've also got Caroline Lucas here, who's the chair of our sister APPG on climate change, and obviously a leading voice in this in the country. Dr. Sarah Finnegan, who's an energy analyst in our partner today, Atkins. And then Nina Kirk, who is our first ever Net Zero APPG Generation Zero ambassador, who we all met in Glasgow, and she actually is from Scotland, from Inverclyde, and she's going to be one of hopefully quite a number of these ambassadors, young people who are going to spread the message of net zero around the country and work with the APPG. So I think the best way to start is to get Zach up here to give us an overview of the report. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good evening. So as Alex has said, I'm Zach Angell. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Oxford. And yeah, I'd say I'm here on behalf of Professor Miles Allen, who unfortunately can't be here. His daughter tested positive for COVID this morning, so he made the decision not to come. So yeah, I'll endeavour not to speak for too long. I'll just give you sort of a brief overview of these basic ideas of the report, which hopefully you'll all read for yourselves. But yeah, Alex, as you said in this introduction, the idea is just to really promote the goal of sort of immediate action that I think all of us in this room really appreciate is highly necessary. So we've got sort of 3 slides of 4 bullet points. Each bullet point is a key point of the report, essentially. So starting off with the idea of the roadmap overall, the sort of framework of this report was to provide a clear, easily accessible sort of guideline of what we think should be the most immediate action in terms of the sort of move to net zero in this country, to sort of guide parliamentarians, business leaders, industry thinkers, and hopefully, sort of by virtue of being here today, you recognise that we're sort of trying to achieve that aim. A green recovery. So in terms of investing in human capital, there's a lot of talk about what we can do in terms of sort of retrofitting or practical solutions that are sort of ready to do sort of with a shovel, or sort of in the traditional sense. But not often a lot of talk about what we can do in terms of upskilling the young people of this country, who will really be the ones who see the outcomes of the actions that we're putting in place today. So moving towards really giving people the skills and the know-how themselves to drive forward this change when we give them sort of the materials to do so. Strategic communications. It's all well and good us being in this room saying what we can and can't do, but actually the people that are driving change, and not just us in this room, but everyone out there, the public at large. And unless, I think as a later bullet point says, if we don't get the public on board, this isn't going to move forward. The money is coming from private industry, from individual sort of lifestyle choice changes, and we can put the incentives in place, but really we do need everyone to get on board with us. Nature-based solutions. This came up a lot when we talked about agriculture and land usage. It's not really a traditional area that's looked at, particularly with climate emissions. Often it's the very sort of, in terms of how we generate our electricity, for example, not looking at other sort of solutions that also impact our sort of goals in terms of the environment in other areas. Nature-based solutions are obviously a great way to do that, providing natural carbon sinks, but also helping with sort of diversification of our wildlife and other such aims. So in terms of demand side measures, regional solutions were a big part of the APPG's vision in this last year. And we've seen time and time again where we looked at different industries that actually sort of a one-size-fits-all approach is not sufficient. It's really, really important to just think actually how are different regions going to think about these problems in different ways and approach it with their own solutions. So we had Andy Burnham join us in one of our sessions to sort of demonstrate that and provide his perspective. And I think that generally we found that local leaders, local business people, they know their local areas and their local needs well. Directing from Westminster is not always the best solution, despite we do need that direction. On a central level, it's really, we've got to empower local people to have local change, which will aggregate up. Transport decarbonisation. So electrification is the really sort of obvious one here. Everyone sees increasingly now hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, and that's sort of the really immediate option is what we can do. But we saw repeatedly that actually the charging infrastructure is just not sufficient. And that links to our regional approach. Regional leaders know where they should be putting their charging infrastructure in. They know where the demand is for it. So we've got to really empower people to make that change and really help sort of boost the electrification of private transport, but also public transport, and encouraging. We've seen during COVID a hit to public transport, but also moves to sort of greener transport in terms of e-bikes, e-scooters, people cycling more, and just encourage that behavioural change that, as I said earlier, will really drive forward the progress. Electricity demand reduction, not only sort of reducing our demand in terms of how we generate our electricity, but also sort of retrofitting, improving our energy efficiency so that we can really sort of just where we can't sort of electrify everything with green electricity, we can just reduce in the immediacy. And again, looking at cities and regions, it's really about sort of giving local people the power to drive local change. And we saw that time and time again in different industries. Supply side measures. So at the top, we've got the hydrogen strategy. Again, not often a talked about area in sort of public discourse. I think it's just not really, it's not one of the obvious things we sort of go for when people talk about climate change, but actually it can be a really, really important way of reducing our climate emissions and getting towards net zero. Carbon capture and storage. I know this is a big sort of thing for Miles, so I will not be able to do justice anywhere near to what he would be able to say on this. But really, it needs upscaling and quite quickly if we're going to hit sort of our targets for carbon capture and storage. And again, in industries, as we see at the bottom with the hard to abate sectors, such as aviation, where the green solutions are not immediately viable, so battery powered flights, hydrogen fueled flights, they're not there in the foreseeable future. Offsetting would be really important to sort of smooth that transition towards net zero. And carbon capture and storage, if we can upscale it well, could be a really great way to do that. And corporate finance, again, as I said earlier, it's all well and good us saying what we think should be done, but actually we've got to empower people to make that change and really drive it forward. One way we can do that is so the government can set the incentive structures to really encourage that corporate finance, because that's sort of where the real money is, the innovation is out there in the private sector. So by setting those clear incentives, we can drive that forward and hopefully get towards net zero a lot quicker than we are at the moment. So that's it from me. Thanks for listening, and hopefully you'll find the report interesting. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Zach. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of this for a very long time, well before I came to Parliament, and we're now sort of drilling down into sort of much more sort of acute and sort of short-term thinking about the measures, as well as thinking about long-term strategy, because the technologies are coming through, particularly in areas like hydrogen, and we've sort of turned a corner, I think, on issues like finance, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. But it's always good to have a perspective from somebody who's been doing this even much longer than me, and somebody from a fellow APPG, and that's Caroline Lucas from the Climate Change APG, and the only MP from the Green Party. So it'd be really interesting to hear Caroline's thoughts on this report and how we can maybe go further and faster. Caroline.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thank you for the invitation to come and be part of this launch. I'm really honoured to do so, and I want to congratulate everyone who's been part of it. I think it's a really timely, exciting, and very positive report, so congratulations to everyone involved in it. As Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, has so clearly said, you know, the focus now needs to be on implementation and delivery. And I think all of us really accept that in all of the plethora of targets and commitments and so forth, what we actually need to see is delivery on the ground. And there are some real concerns. The net zero strategy published in October lacked both urgency and serious funding. And as a result, it doesn't put us on a track to where we need to be. The transport decarbonisation plan doubled down on car use rather than scrapping the £27 billion road building scheme. The Prime Minister's Green Homes Grant scheme branded a slam dunk fail by the Public Accounts Committee. And of course, barely a mention of climate in the Chancellor's budget, just days ahead of COP26. So it couldn't be clearer, really, that there is an enormous amount to be done to achieve net zero by 2050, or preferably very much sooner. And that's why I really do welcome this report and the roadmap, the focus on the need for a clear plan to deliver the goals. I very much share the concerns of the Net Zero APPG that, and I quote, many in government appear to have yet to appreciate the scale of the changes involved. I welcome in particular the focus on the economy and finance in the report. A green recovery from COVID-19 is absolutely essential. And of course, by famously building back better, we can also create millions of good quality green jobs, as well as having that scaling up of investment that we need in climate and nature. A new government-backed infrastructure bank must also clearly have a net zero mandate. And I also welcome the focus on opportunities for cities and regions and the focus on public engagement. And I think anyone who's been following any of those processes on citizens' assemblies will know that when you have citizens' assemblies on climate change, they tend to come up with proposals that are far more ambitious than anything that any government is coming up with. And so that level of engagement with people, I think, is both necessary in itself, but I think it would also mean that we'll probably end up with more ambitious policies too. Now, you don't want me just to stand here and say how wonderful the report is. The report is wonderful, but that would be a bit boring. So I just wanted to offer 3 short provocations around the report as well. And one provocation perhaps might be that there's a lot of focus in the report on stuff that we need to do, and maybe rather less focus on the stuff that we need to stop doing it. And I guess my contention would be that unless we stop doing the bad stuff, all the good stuff that we do isn't going to get us where we need to be. And by that, of course, I mean that until we stop exploiting fossil fuels, then we can build as many wind turbines as we like, and we can invest in hydrogen as much as we like, and so on and so forth, but we won't get to where we need to be. In other words, I think the zero carbon economy has to replace the fossil fuel economy, not run parallel to it. And I know everyone here knows that, and it's becoming ever clearer with the IEA itself saying absolutely that there should be no new fossil fuels exploitation if the world is to achieve net zero by 2050. And yet on the government statute book, we've still got the policy to maximise the economic recovery of North Sea fossil fuels. The North Sea transition deal failed to rule out new gas and oil, instead proposing what I think is fairly laughable, this climate compatibility checkpoint. I mean, they only needed to ask the IEA, which would tell them that no new fossil fuel exploitation is climate compatible. And while I was delighted to see last week that Cambo has been put on pause, it's of course ministers have repeatedly refused to put a stop to the project. So in other words, the first provocation would be about let's have a bit more focus on things we need to stop doing as well as things we need to start doing. Second, I don't know, but it feels to me at least that there is a very risky over-reliance on CCS and CO2 removal in the report. And I know we could have a big debate about that, but it worries me. For example, when it comes to heavy industry, I'm really glad that there is a focus on the difficult to abate areas. We absolutely do need to look at that. But it does worry me that we're putting so much hope in as yet untried and tested technologies. And there is a real risk there, I think, that we need to acknowledge that we take the pressure off the focus on the need for much deeper real cuts now. So I would argue a little bit about the balance between real cuts now versus hopes for technology to fill up the gap sometime in the future. And finally, I would just say as well that we also need to move away from our current extractive, exploitative, and growth-addicted economic system to an economy which values people and planet. And just a simple example of what I mean, everyone's talking about net zero by 2050, that's 30 years away. In those 30 years, the size of the global economy is due to treble in size. Now, it is going to be challenge enough to decarbonize an economy the size of the current one. To do that 3 times over is, I think, pretty heroic in terms of our assumptions. And although someone might well say, well, don't worry, decoupling is going to happen, we're going to be that much more efficient, we're going to be able to have all of this growth without emissions, I would really sort of challenge to say I have yet to see any example to suggest that we're going to be able to decouple on anything like the scale and the speed that we're going to need to do in order to decarbonize fast enough. Finally, we need to move obviously much faster than 2050, and I think 2050 is the global target, and that means countries like the UK need to go further and faster because we have historic responsibilities. We have been historically more responsible than most countries in terms of the amount of emissions already in the atmosphere. And if we are to decarbonize in a way that is globally just as well as effective, then I think the UK needs to do more than aiming for 2050, which I know the report absolutely does say, and I really welcome that. So I think this is a great road plan, and I look forward to working with the APPG to think about it further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. As well as government and President government, we obviously need partners in the private sector to deliver this report. That's why I'm really pleased that today we're partnering with Atkins, and our next speaker is Dr. Sarah Finnegan, who's an energy analyst at Atkins, who's going to give us perspective from their point of view about the report and how they're going to work towards net zero. So Sarah.
Evening, everyone. Yeah, so as was said, I'm an energy analyst, quite a new start at Atkins. I started a few months ago, and I'm going to speak to you guys today just briefly about the energy portion of the report. So at Atkins, just like the rest of the energy industry, we recognise there is that need for a rapid decarbonisation of the energy sector. And what we're going to focus on, a number of the things we'll focus on, is a few key points. So first of all is our renewables, in particular offshore wind. And also carbon capture and storage through gas, CCS through gas, and manufacturing and storage of hydrogen. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to speak about a few of the issues that we have with that, because just like it's been said, it's urgent. We actually want to decarbonize the energy sector by 2035, which is only 13 years' time. So to begin with offshore wind, we clearly need more investment, we need more funding, and we need more offshore wind farms. But we can't just rely on that, because wind is intermittent, just like other renewables. So what we could have to prop something like that up is, and this is a contentious point, I understand, but something like nuclear power. We have Hinkley Point C, and it is to be commissioned hopefully in the next few years. And we have something that the government is considering or in the process of securing funding for, which is Sobel C, another nuclear power plant. But at the same time, these nuclear power plants, like Hinkley Point C, will be commissioned in a few years. Sobel C hasn't even begun, so they can't solve the problem by 2035. So another possible solution or something else to help is something like carbon capture and storage with gas. What we need for that is a regular pipeline of carbon capture and storage projects, something that we need to invest in quickly. I'll say this urgency, 13 years is not a long time. I don't need to tell you that. Finally, then, we also have the manufacturing and storage of hydrogen. That's probably the one that has the least understanding. So actually, that one in particular needs huge investment in the actual research and development side of things, getting young people involved in the research behind how to produce, how to manufacture and store that hydrogen more efficiently than previous. So I've spoken about those 3 points. And I guess the last thing that I want to mention is then you've got me here today. So I'm that next generation, and I'm appealing on behalf of our generation that when we're actually then in the position where we're stepping into your shoes, into the more senior positions that are here today, it's going to be reaching 2035, maybe even 2050, I'm not sure. But what we want to be able to do is, like, once we're there, is actually say that we got the job done. So we need that you guys, the guys in Parliament, the guys in industry, to secure the investment, secure the funding, so that when we walk in, we can get the job done. That's everything I came to say. Thank you very much for having me to speak today, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you. So I think you laid out the challenge. I think there's on hydrogen, there's a few challenges there. There is a educational challenge as well as a manufacturing and demand side challenge. And we have made huge steps in green hydrogen, but we are lacking probably those two elements, the education side and the demand side. But I'm really delighted that we've got our final speaker, Nina Kirk, who's made a very long journey to be here today. I hope without too many problems, considering all the COVID related issues. And I met Nina in Glasgow at COP26, and she's our first net zero generation ambassador that the APPG has. And I'm really delighted here, and she can tell us about her journey. I think it's got a little presentation as well for us. So Nina.
Hi, I'm Nina, and I'm delighted to be one of the Generation Zero ambassadors. To get this role, I made a short clip, which I think is going to be shown, just about why I wanted to get this and so forth. So. That's okay. That's it. Thank you. As my video said, I am currently 16 years old, which means by 2050, I will be 45 years old. And that made me think, what will my life be like, and yours, if we don't change now? It is my generation and future generations who will have to deal with the consequences of our changing climate. I'm passionate about the need for action and hope that MPs of all parties will listen to me and do what they can to support the actions needed to safeguard the future of tomorrow's generation today. It's time to start treating climate change like the virus and help stop it from getting any deadlier. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. I think Nina encapsulates why we're here today and what the scale of the challenge is, and that it's a challenge for all of us, whether it's the government, whether it's the private sector, or whether all of us as individuals. And I think that that's the challenge of climate change, and the challenge that we've set ourselves, Net Zero APPG, and this roadmap's just a very small part of that. And we'll utilize the roadmap not only here in Parliament to challenge government, but also to work and try and bring in more people from the private sector in on the journey. I have to say, every day I get 2 or 3 emails from corporate companies who have signed up to net zero, who want to talk about their net zero pathway and roadmap, sometimes to say that they've got gaps in their net zero roadmap. And we can utilize the work we're doing, the work with Oxford and other universities, the work with NGOs and the work with best practice in the private sector to help them, as well as try and unlock some of that support from government and try and make what is currently difficult possible. And I just want to say, finally, you've got until 6 o'clock in the room, and I would make use of it because I think this might well be the last event that we have in Parliament for quite a few months. So we might be able to say, in Emily's indicating me, there's a QR code. Scan the QR code. Yeah, scan the QR code because you might all get pinged tomorrow. And then it should be particularly difficult for me and Alan because we're meant to come and vote on the regulations. But on a serious note, it's really important actually in these things. I think we saw at COP, if COP had been an online COP, a virtual COP was disappointing, for me particularly, and I think a lot of us, but did make some progress in some key areas. Would we have made that progress? We'd all been sat at home, tuning in on Zoom? Probably not, because a lot of the way COP works is that face-to-face interaction. I think it's the same right across the piece in terms of climate change and net zero. So it's good that we utilize this, and hopefully we won't lose months and months again. But just in case, enjoy yourselves until 6 o'clock. Thank you.